Before sunrise on the 27th of March 1943, Archerfield Aerodrome stirred quietly in the darkness. The war never slept, and neither did the men and women who served here. In the stillness of that early morning, a tragedy unfolded that would claim lives, devastate families, and fade into obscurity for decades. This is the story brought back to life by Brisbane-based author and ex-soldier Andrew Johnston, in his book All Life's Lost: The Complete Untold Story of the 1943 Archerfield Air Tragedy. At the center of the tragedy was the C-47 Dakota transport aircraft, call sign VHCTB, registered with the Royal Australian Air Force as A3016. It belonged to No. 36 Squadron, RAAF, a unit whose aircraft carried the lifeblood of the war effort across Australia and the Pacific: people, supplies, and hope. On board that morning were 23 souls, 4 crew members from No. 36 Squadron, and 19 passengers. Among them were 2 individuals whose stories would come to define the heartbreak of that day: Corporal Violet Gunning and leading aircraftman Kevin Flanagan. Shortly after 0500 hours, while most of Brisbane still slept, VHCTB prepared for takeoff. Inside the aircraft, its passengers faced journeys shaped by duty, urgency, and in Kevin Flanagan's case, a burden of personal grief almost too heavy to imagine. What happened next would change everything. The engines shattered the quiet of the pre-dawn air. The Dakota rolled forward, gathering speed along the dimly lit strip, its silhouette rising against the faint glow of an approaching sunrise. Moments after lifting off, something went terribly wrong. VHCTB entered a low fog bank at the southern end of the runway, struggled to climb, then veered left, dipping sharply, before striking the ground just beyond the aerodrome boundary. The impact was catastrophic. A violent explosion tore through the stillness, jolting awake the nearby US Army camp, as flames engulfed the wreckage. Within moments, the aircraft was consumed. All 23 people on board were gone. In the aftermath, authorities faced an almost unimaginable task: piecing together what had happened, and who had been lost. But the full truth of the tragedy, and the stories of those aboard, would take days to emerge. 23 lives, one devastating moment, and a chapter of wartime history nearly forgotten, until now. Among the passengers was Corporal Violet Gunning, one of 3 proud and capable members of the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force travelling together that morning, all friends, all serving together. For 2 days, searchers worked methodically through the wreckage of VHCTB, looking for personal effects, and any trace of those still unaccounted for. Only then, deep within the twisted structure of the aircraft, did they make a solemn discovery: Violet had been there all along, concealed within the wreckage. Her loss, and the quiet tragedy of her delayed discovery, resonated deeply within the WAAF community. A young woman dedicated to her country, remembered with honor and respect. Also aboard was leading aircraftman Kevin Flanagan. But Flanagan was not traveling for routine duty. He had been granted emergency leave, racing home to Sydney because his wife was expected to deliver a stillborn baby. He never made it home. For his family, already bracing for heartbreak, the news that followed was almost unbearable. The tragedy they feared had been joined by another, deeper one. 2 lives, 2 stories, each reflecting the human cost of a war that touched every corner of Australia. These stories, raw, human, and so often overlooked, are honored in Andrew Johnston's work, ensuring that every life lost is remembered with dignity. The 23 people aboard VHCTB were more than names on a manifest. They were pilots, aircrew, servicemen, and servicewomen, each carrying their own hopes, burdens, and reasons for flying that morning. At the controls was Flying Officer Alexander Arnold, just 27 years old, leading his No. 36 Squadron crew, Sergeant Joseph Hammond, 29. Sergeant Lyle Morgan, 24, and leading aircraftman Samuel Wiles, 36. Their passengers formed a cross-section of wartime Australia, men and women drawn from different units, different backgrounds, but united by service. Sergeant John Atherton, 34. Leading aircraftman Thomas Beckley, 28. Pilot Officer David Blakely, 31. Leading aircraftman John Chinner, only 20. Sergeant Robert Chisholm, 26. Leading aircraftman Kevin Flanagan, 34. Leading aircraftman Charles Fly, 42. Corporal Violet Gunning, 25. Corporal Ruth Hills, 20. Aircraftwoman Florence Jackson, 25. Sergeant Max Jarvis, 23. Leading aircraftman Terence Kelly, 36. Leading aircraftman Kenneth Patton, 34. Lieutenant Erwin Smith, 31. Pilot Officer Alfred Tatlock, 36. Leading aircraftman Jeffrey Waters, 34. Corporal Thomas Watt, 26. And among them, 2 American servicemen, Major Eugene Hallowell, 28, and First Lieutenant Francis Skinner, also 28. 23 lives, 23 stories, all aboard a single aircraft on a quiet Brisbane morning, unaware that history was about to close in around them. They were not just wartime statistics. They were people with families, futures, and dreams. Their loss rippled across Australia, through homes, bases, and communities who received the devastating telegrams that followed. The scale of the loss was overwhelming. For the Royal Australian Air Force, the heartbreak was matched only by the confusion. The crash had been so violent, the remains so intermingled, that positive identification became almost impossible. RAAF authorities agonized over what to do. For a moment, a terrible moment, they considered the unthinkable, a single mass grave, one burial for 21 souls. But in the end, compassion prevailed. Even without certainty, even without names that could be confidently matched to each coffin, the decision was made. Every person would be buried individually. Every life would be honored, even if the identity beneath each flag could not be known. On the 29th of March, just 2 days later, Brisbane awoke to a sight it had never seen before. A solemn procession of flag-draped coffins moved through the city streets, bound for Lutwyche Cemetery. Before the day was over, 21 coffins would be lowered into the earth, the Australian victims of the Archerfield air disaster. The 2 American victims were buried that same day in a separate service at the United States Armed Forces Military Cemetery, Ipswich. At Lutwyche, families stood in silence, some grieving sons, others daughters, brothers, husbands. Some did not know which coffin held their loved one, but they knew their loved one was here, somewhere among the 21. And in that moment, that was enough. One by one, the coffins descended. The ropes creaked softly, the chaplain's voice trembled as they read the names that could not be matched with certainty to the remains below. It was a burial unlike any other in Brisbane's wartime history. As the last post drifted across Lutwyche, the grief of a city settled into the soil. 21 individuals, buried side by side, united in tragedy, honored in dignity. Here, in this quiet row, lies the human cost of that March morning, a reminder of the chaos, the heartbreak, and the impossible decisions made in the aftermath. They were not forgotten then. They are not forgotten now. Today, Archerfield Airport remains active. Aircraft still rise and descend over the same ground where tragedy once struck. Most who pass through have no idea of the lives lost here, or the sacrifices made on that March morning in 1943. But thanks to the work of Brisbane author and ex-soldier Andrew Johnston, these stories are no longer forgotten. His research, and his book, ensure that every life, every sacrifice, is honored. And the question of how? Well, that can now be answered. On the 27th of March 1943, Archerfield witnessed sorrow beyond measure. A Dakota transport plane, VHCTB, A3016, that never made its climb. A young woman in uniform, found days later within the wreckage. A devoted husband and airman, trying desperately to reach his grieving wife. And 21 others whose stories deserve to be remembered. Their stories matter, their lives mattered, and today, more than 80 years on, we remember them, all of them. Thank you for watching, and for helping keep their memory alive. To explore the full story, discover All Lives Lost, the complete untold story of the 1943 Archerfield Air Tragedy by Andrew Johnston. Visit andrewjohnstonbooks.com or look for Andrew's work via Amazon.